I've got it. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to welcome you all here today. We're going to start promptly at the top of the hour. My name's Lily, and I'm the Climate and Disaster Resilience Manager here at SoCal Grantmakers. Just some gentle reminders on etiquette at the top. All attendees will be joining on mute. So throughout the program, please feel free to submit questions via the chat box. We're going to try to get through as many as possible during the Q&A towards the end, but our staff will be monitoring the chat and providing links. So please feel free to use the chat box to share your thoughts and your own resources as well. Things have been moving really fast and they've been moving nonstop. So I want to begin by grounding us in this moment of community, of coming together, and of finding hope in dark times. So thank you so much for being here during what feels like an impossible week. I hope we can all take a moment to take a breath. And in that breath, reflect on reflect on the moment of being here together and think about what motivates us to show up for this work again and again. I'd like to pass it to Chris Essel for some opening remarks at this time.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Essel, and I serve as President and CEO of SoCal Grantmakers. Thank you for being here today. If you're new to us, SCG is a philanthropy serving organization that serves the Southern California region, and we work in partnership with Northern California Grantmakers and Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial counties under the Philanthropy California Alliance. We represent over 600 funders from community foundations, family foundations, corporate, government, giving circles, funder networks, as well as high net worth individuals. One of our most important functions is to convene funders, which is what we are doing today, though I know we have a much broader audience than that. The purpose of this briefing is essentially to provide a shared understanding of the philanthropic response and to prepare funders for the long-term investment that will be needed for recovery. Given the extraordinary devastation that has occurred in our region, it's very heartening to know that we have over 1,300 people registered for this session. We are recording it, so it will be available after the fact. We are fortunate to present this briefing in partnership with the League of California Community Foundations, with Cal OES, Smart Growth California, United Philanthropy Forum, Center for Disaster Philanthropy, and the Council on Foundations. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are joined by partners at the Governor's Office, our SCG Corporate Advisory Committee, Center for Strategic Partnerships, and FEMA, who we invite to lend your expertise in the chat throughout the session, and especially during Q&A. We thank you again for your attendance and hope you gain a lot from this session. Back to you, Lily.
Thanks, Chris. The wildfires that began last week are not just something that we're responding to. I want to acknowledge that this is something that we're also going through with friends, family, colleagues, and loved ones. And if you're not directly impacted, you probably know someone who knows someone who knows someone. I also want to acknowledge that there have been 27 fatalities, 27 lives lost, including Victor Shaw, Rodney Nickerson, Erlene Kelly of Altadena, many of whom were seniors and those with access and functional needs. Thousands of structures have been lost. Many of them were homes that represent generational wealth that can no longer be passed on. Tens of thousands displaced, schools and businesses destroyed. Many of us within the philanthropic community have found ourselves revisiting the playbooks that we built during COVID to help us deploy resources now. This disaster is new, but somehow it feels like we've all been here before. So I want to give you an overview of how Philanthropy California mobilizes during disasters. We play several major roles. Jacqueline, I'm going to share my screen here. The first major resource that we provide is our disaster response page. You have likely seen the link for this floating around this week. This is a list of vetted funds. We currently have 18, and we do have a formal vetting process in place to ensure that our list represents funds managed by experienced, accredited grant-making organizations with a long-term commitment to affected communities and to anti-discrimination in their grant-making practices. And all of this enables us to ensure transparency, accountability, and donor intent. If you are a grant maker, You can use our list to track active funds and identify potential partnerships aligned with your geography or your focus area or your population that you serve. You can use these features here to filter through funds that align with your grant making. And if you're a grant seeker, you can also use this list to identify sources of rapid response and recovery funding. The second major function is to leverage our public-private partnerships during disasters, primarily through shared messaging with the governor's office and Cal OES's Business Operations Center. And then finally, we do our best to point funders towards resources and to facilitate coordination through our networks and through briefings just like these. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our roster of speakers who, over the course of our time here, will share about their collective efforts over these past 2 weeks. We have with us Abby Browning, Chief of the Office of Private Sector and NGO Coordination at Cal OES, Miguel Santana, President CEO of California Community Foundation, Jennifer Duvall, President CEO of Pasadena Community Foundation, Emily Bradley, Director of Strategic Investments at United Way of Greater Los Angeles, and Julian Castro, CEO of Latino Community Foundation. I would like to first hand it off to Abby to provide a situation report. Abby, your team has been sending out daily reports through the Business Ops Center, and you've launched the California Donations Portal, which is meant for monetary and in-kind donations. Could you level set and maybe tell us what things are looking like in terms of impacts and state and local coordination?
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me this time to address the audience here. This is a very large audience and very appreciative of this time. Just giving you a brief update on the current situation on the ground. As of this morning, the Eaton fire is 65% contained. The Palisades fire is 31% contained. As far as structures destroyed, this is residences and businesses. There is a little over 10,000 that have been counted as destroyed. We're not finished with the disaster assessment, but we are moving as quickly as we can. And if you are concerned about specific addresses, Los Angeles Recovery has a website where you can go and see those specific addresses. As you all know, there are still evacuation orders in place. I believe there's plans in place to start repopulation, that is carried out and led by the local government, and we are in support of those efforts. As of last night, there were still 569 individuals in shelters, but 80,000 people were still in mandatory evacuations. So that's the numbers that we're looking at. We have stood up our FEMA disaster recovery centers 2 days ago, and we have already had over 60,000 individuals register, and $11 million has already gone out the door from the federal government in those immediate response funds. This is a very quickly moving recovery. I was asked, are we in recovery? Have we officially moved? The answer is yes and no. Honestly, we're doing both at the same time. We are still in an active response. It is still an active fire, and there's still weather conditions that we are concerned about. But we are also have already started with recovery, full speed ahead. We are getting every resource we could possibly get from the federal government. And phase 1 has already started with the debris removal for US EPA and Cal EPA. That's the hazardous household waste. If you're not familiar with fires, when we have a damaged or destroyed structure and a fire destroys it's gone. It's ash. And you have a lot of things in your home that when they burn leave hazardous materials that is not safe for anyone to not even handle or breathe in. So our environmental folks go in first and remove those, and then the second tranche of debris can begin, and that is being discussed as we speak. It was mentioned about the donations portal. Yes, that is set up, and I'm sure the link will be shared. It's out there for everyone. Donations at .caloes.ca.gov, and that is for corporate in-kind donations. We want to respect your donation, and so if you offer it up, We will only take it if we can use it for the individuals that were impacted by the disaster. Obviously, we can't use it today. So say you wanted to donate mattresses, that would be months down. But we will definitely be working with you as that goes along. But the number one thing that we would like to encourage everyone and anyone to do is the monetary donations. You'll be hearing from several of our community leaders later today on this call. That is where we want to send most of our donations, most of the efforts, because that's really what's going to impact the community. These community foundations and the groups that are listed on the vetted funds represent several different industries, several different folks, different communities, and it's going to take all of us. This is a massive event. The recovery is going to be a long time. However, I have the utmost faith in Los Angeles. They're sophisticated, they're a strong community, and they have already started planning with recovery. And they're up and they're moving, and we're going to get through this. And California is wrapping its arms around Los Angeles as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to yield the rest of my time so you can actually hear from the folks on the ground responding to the individual community members. But again, I just wanted to say a heartfelt thank you from the state of California for your time and your effort in supporting these Angelinos that were impacted by these disasters. Nobody wants to have a disaster. It hurts my heart to know that they had to go through this. But the silver lining is Californians are resilient. Angelinos are very resilient. This will be all right. We will get through this. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that update, Abby. Next up, I would like to introduce Jennifer Duvall to speak to us about efforts on behalf of the Pasadena Community Foundation. Jennifer, what should funders know about the impacts to the Pasadena community and your efforts to support Altadena in particular?
Yeah, so thank you everyone who's here, and thank you to those who have already supported PCF's Eat and Fire Fund. Appreciate that very much. PCF's been supporting the Altadena and Pasadena communities for more than 70 years, and we have really strong relationships with folks on the ground here. I want to begin by just sharing a few stories from the front lines. I know you are all hearing stories, but the devastation is truly unimaginable. And so I just want to share a couple of things. First of all, 2 Pasadena firefighters lost their homes, along with so many other people. The first African Methodist Episcopal Church is the oldest Black church congregation in Pasadena dating back to the 1800s. 54 of those families lost their homes. Most of them live in Altadena. They are having a community meeting at the church today. My community impact director is there with many other folks to sort of hear from them. Families Forward Learning Center is a nonprofit that serves low-income Latino families and their children. They report that 70% of their families were evacuated and 25 lost their homes. The Altadena Senior Center was destroyed, and all 10 members of the Altadena Meals on Wheels board lost their homes. We have been supporting a program at John Muir High School that serves young Black men. We just learned that 9 of those high school kids lost their homes, and 6 of them have homes that were damaged and they are displaced. The chair and the vice chair of the Altadena Town Council have lost their homes. Our parking attendant in our building lost his home. The woman who cleans our offices every night lost her home. Childcare facilities have been wiped out. The schools have been closed, which even puts more pressure on that. PUSD reports that 5 of their 24 schools have been burned or damaged. Our local online newspaper, Pasadena Now, reported this morning that more than 10,000 of 14,000 students were evacuated during the disaster. So I do at this time want to also lift up the Pasadena Educational Foundation Response Fund. They are really on the front lines helping teachers and families. What are we doing at the Pasadena Community Foundation? So first of all, I just want to say a shout out to my colleagues at other community foundations. We are collaborating with California Community Foundation and tapping the expertise of our colleagues in Napa, Ventura, and others who sadly have expertise in this area of responding to a fire disaster. So we are getting important guidance from them. And I think some of that is just to be mindful that this will have a long tail and to not lose sight in the early days of this sort of frantic response, that we need to take some time to be thoughtful about our mid and longer term recovery and resilience needs in the community. Today, we announced and distributed over $500,000 in emergency grants to 20 organizations locally. These are groups that are supporting those who have the capacity to support people who have been directly impacted through displacement of loss of home or evacuation, or loss of employment, and many have lost both. So the whole ecosystem is impacted. The nonprofit infrastructure is stressed. The CEO of Door of Hope, it's a homeless serving organization, is now herself homeless. I mean, and so it goes. It's hard to fathom. Several funders have reached out to us to help them identify local organizations, and we've been happy to make some of those connections. And thank you to those who've been able to support our grantees and others in our community doing great work. We know that help from outside the community is going to be needed. California Community Foundation, again, is a great partner in helping us to identify Los Angeles-based organizations that support our community and whose help is needed at this time. Believe that mandatory evacuations were just lifted here in our local area. So yes, we as Abby said, we are still in active crisis and response mode, but we are already developing strategies for next steps. I think first and foremost, temporary housing is a huge issue. People are with friends, they're in hotels. So we need some creative solutions around short-term housing. We're in conversation with the county about finding a location for some rental RVs. We have an individual donor who's provided some initial funding to sort of pilot that as a temporary solution. We need many solutions, not just one. The YWCA in San Gabriel Valley is led by Deborah Ward. They have a 40-year track record as the primary vendor for seniors and food services in Altadena. They serve 300 clients who have been affected, the majority of whom have lost their homes. So they need specialized case management funding for that. So I think case management, temporary housing, mental health, those are some of the things we're looking at next. The Pasadena Job Center, who supports our day laborers, are already working to help our forestry and public works crews with the cleanup. These workers will be critical to rebuilding our community. We want to keep them here. We know there are some outside threats to that community, so they need our help as well. Ultimately, what I'm hearing is that the rebuilding of Altadena, people want that to be locally driven. There are community groups already mobilizing with some really creative ideas. There's a group meeting later today, spearheaded by Altadena Heritage and some local architects who want to provide support to those families who want to rebuild. There's some really great creative financing ideas coming in from experienced affordable housing developers. So we're just trying to wrap our head around some of those ideas. people want to ensure that the beauty and diversity of Altadena is preserved. They want to ensure that Black and Latino families can rebuild their homes, rebuild their lives, stay in this community. They want to ensure that the creative and artistic community can thrive. They want the beloved small businesses to reopen. And I think we need support long-term to bring this expertise together, to develop plans, to turn those plans into action. And I guess I would just leave you with the thought that Altadena has, they want to control their own destiny, and they have the talent and the expertise to do that if we can just give them the resources to make that happen. So thank you for your time today, and thank you to everyone who's been so supportive. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. We have a few extra minutes with you, so I'm wondering if we could touch on and go back to housing, because you mentioned that temporary housing is a big focus of yours. We know that many of the homes that were lost are either under or uninsured, and a lot of people will apply for FEMA assistance and government assistance, but not everyone will qualify, and not everyone will bring themselves to apply. So how are you thinking about that problem set? Could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. I mean, candidly, we are hearing anecdotally that this is going to be a problem, but we have no information or facts yet. So I don't know that we have an answer yet. We're still kind of intel gathering. Anecdotally, I was at a community event speaking last night and just heard from a homeowner who does have damage to his home, but he does have a home. He's a sophisticated guy who knows how to navigate things. He's on the FAIR plan because his insurance company dropped him 3 months ago. In a moment of levity, he said it was a smart business decision on their part. However, he also described the FAIR plan as a black hole, candidly. He said, you can't get through, you can't get information, you can't get anybody. So that's also what we're hearing. I would describe, that's also a problem. So I know that there are already folks on the ground here, whether it's nonprofits or even law firms and others who are offering their services to help people navigate the insurance industry. But I think the uninsured, that's going to be an issue, and we don't have the answers today.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Jennifer. And maybe we can keep expanding on this as we speak to our other panelists. I'd like to move to Miguel Santana from California Community Foundation. Miguel, do we have you?
Yes, I'm here, and I apologize I'm not on screen. I'm actually on my way to the office from the community event that Jennifer mentioned in Altadena. The California Community Foundation has had a wildfire fund since 2003, and it's really been the place that Angelenos have supported victims from around the state. And sadly, now it's our turn. And the amount of support to support Angelenos in the Palisades and in Altadena, Pasadena has been incredibly moving and phenomenal. As of today, we've raised over $30 million of support from philanthropy, from corporations, from institutions, and from over 23,000 individual donors from around the country who have been generous and have been sending their love and support here to Southern California. Today, we're going to be giving out $15 million of grants to communities that have been impacted, particularly supporting the most vulnerable victims who have experienced significant loss, and to those organizations who are serving them, including faith-based organizations who have been completely eliminated through the fire, 11 throughout in both communities, who were not just places of worship, but were also places of convening and support for seniors, for many children's centers, schools. We're supporting organizations that provide education services to the young people who have been impacted from childcare to college. We're supporting mental health services, direct cash assistance to those who have been impacted, not just those who lost their homes, but also the thousands of displaced workers who no longer have a place to work and who immediately have lost their income. And we're doing this in a kind of a three-tiered way. This first round of grants are really to respond to the immediate crisis. The way we have done these in other community is that we stay for the long haul. We are committed to ensuring that every family who's been impacted gets housed and gets to be returned back to their community. And so from there, we are, as we've done in other parts of the state, we continue to be supportive. I just parked, so here's my mug. What I'll also share is that we're working very closely with our colleagues like the Pasadena Community Foundation, the Community Foundation in the San Fernando Valley, and other institutions that know their communities very deeply, making sure that it's a coordinated response. And we encourage all of you, we will be releasing their grantees that we're supporting later today in the afternoon. And we encourage, and we're going to make it very public to encourage others to support those same organizations. I could also share that my colleagues in philanthropy, representing institutional philanthropy here in Southern California, have been meeting regularly to best coordinate our efforts and to ensure that's an ongoing structure moving forward.
Thanks, Miguel. I have a couple follow-up questions, and thank you for all of your efforts on the ground. We were really excited to hear that California Community Foundation is partnering with the California Black Freedom Fund to launch the Black LA Relief and Recovery Fund. And to share a statistic with our attendees, according to a recent New York Times article, only 8% of LA County is Black, and yet 21% of affected households belong to Black individuals and families. So could you tell us a little bit more about this fund and how the dollars will be deployed?
So the California Black Freedom Fund was established after the murder of George Floyd. It is a statewide fund, and we are their Southern California anchor. We have a strong relationship with them and work together in partnership. As a result of the fires, particularly impacting the Altadena African American community that goes deep, that has been there for generations. Just this morning, I heard stories of people who lost homes in the Tulsa massacre and who moved to Altadena and now have lost their home in Altadena. And so the Black Freedom Fund is specifically focused in supporting the infrastructure of African American led organizations to ensure that Altadena continues to be one of the hubs of the African American community here in Southern California. And so their website ensures that those dollars go specifically for this purpose. And so I encourage all of you to consider supporting them.
Thank you so much. And we do have a few extra minutes with you. And I really would love your perspective since the foundation has responded to so many wildfires across the state. What is it that makes this moment unique and this disaster unique to you?
What makes it unique is the scale the fact that it impacted distinct communities and the enormity of the damage in the two principal communities that have been impacted. So not only have people lost homes, but the very infrastructure of nonprofit organizations, businesses, associations have also been devastated. So imagine an entire community completely wiped out in terms of not only its physical infrastructure, but its social infrastructure. And so what's going to be very important is that there be attention and a multi-year effort to not only rebuild, but to rebuild the community in the image of those very communities, as was stated. There is a lot of concern, and I heard a lot about it today at the meeting in Altadena, that already there are different folks who are coming in trying to take advantage of the devastation, and there's significant legitimate fear that the communities that were there prior to this horrible event will be gone forever. And so as philanthropy, we have a very important responsibility to make sure that not only is there rebuilding and it's done quickly, but as important, that it is grounded in the values and in the very infrastructure, social infrastructure that existed prior to this event.
Thank you so much, Miguel, for being here with us. We know that you're in between meetings and you're in the thick of it, so we really appreciate your time. We hope you can join the Q&A, but we also understand that you have to drop at noon.
Yes.
I would like to, at this point, introduce Emily Bradley, our next speaker, who is the Director of Strategic Investments at United Way of Greater Los Angeles. Emily, earlier this week, United Way hosted a funder briefing that was focused on housing and homelessness, but also this bigger question of how the wildfires are going to affect affordability and economic livelihood in the region long term. Can you start by maybe sharing some takeaways from that convening and how that relates to your current work?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for creating this space and for all of the collective effort. I think we're an organization born out of disaster. In 1918, many moons ago, the Spanish flu wiped out a significant portion of the local population, and there was a groundswell of mutual aid response. And civic and philanthropic organizations were born out of that moment, including United Way of Greater Los Angeles. And since that time, we've been part of the kind of ongoing response to pressing issues facing Los Angeles, such as homelessness, as well as kind of mobilizing in these kind of bigger disaster moments, like the 2018 Woolsey fire and the COVID-19 pandemic. As you mentioned, earlier this week, we hosted a funder briefing. We have an ongoing group of public and private funders who have come around the conversation on housing and homelessness over the last decade. The Home for Good Funders Collaborative has been a space to share and coordinate and to really mobilize and maximize our collective resources around these issues. And so we saw the opportunity to create that space for cross-sharing and welcomed in some of our public sector leaders to share about the current response. There's obviously the response to the homeowners and renters who've been directly impacted by the fires, but we also wanted to uplift kind of the disruption that occurred to kind of the broader landscape of service delivery. And in that sense, I'll share that, there were 17 interim housing sites in the fire zones that were evacuated, which meant mobilizing and moving hundreds of people who were being sheltered in those spaces. Additionally, at the same time, we have a lot of folks who are living unhoused in Los Angeles who are either in the evacuation zones or also continue to be in affected areas where there's, smoke and health concerns. And so there's been a big mobilization of how do we get masks and supplies out to people who can not come inside to safety and shelter. And so that mobilization and those moments have also, I want to underscore, been continuous for our service sector. Our fearless frontline leaders who are not only the first responders to the disaster, but also the frontline leaders who are first responders to the service needs and community needs, the mutual aid groups, the nonprofits, are truly heroic in these kinds of moments. And as you've heard from some of the other speakers, many of these service providers also live in the communities that are being impacted, and they themselves have been directly impacted by the fires, losing homes and then still having to show up and support those who've lost their homes as well. And so in those moments, I think it's really especially important that we're making sure we're looking at how are we helping the helpers, because these are pivotal people to our long-term recovery, as well as, folks that we need to be resilient for our next disasters. But also just, to circle it back and underscore, there are lots of impacted, communities and targeted groups that we're very deeply concerned about, both in this moment and because there is a long-term and ongoing disasters in Los Angeles, like homelessness and housing affordability, that we need to be mindful of. And these moments exacerbate that. There are definitely concerns about price gouging, about speculative market taking properties. And so for all these reasons, we need to mobilize publicly around policy actions that protect folks who are returning, as well as making sure that we're finding ways to support populations who are not going to have access to the same level of disaster response resources as others. And additionally, as we look at reshaping and rebuilding these communities, thinking about how do we not only put back what was there, but how do we build on the spirit and the soul of these communities with local members to really bring prosperity to these communities in a way that also creates resilience for the next disaster that we might experience.
Thanks, Emily. You're already touching on what I want to ask about next, but United Way is, typically very focused on long-term recovery and does a really wonderful job of centering populations that are often overlooked during disasters, including domestic workers, unhoused populations, service workers, lower income small business owners. So what do you hope funders keep in mind as we're shifting from response into these earlier days of recovery, but also long-term recovery, like you're starting to allude to?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I kind of touch on that point, I'll also share that while we're also coordinating with different funders and partners and trying to stay active in the response, we did launch also our Wildfire Response Fund. We've launched funds for the pandemic, as well as the Woolsey Fire and other key moments. And so we are really looking at these populations that you mentioned, low-income individuals whose livelihoods have been disrupted, like domestic workers, day laborers, people experiencing homelessness and those who serve them, and these small business and community organizations. And similar to others, I think we're looking at this as more of a phased approach. Right now, we're in a response moment, emergency moment. But as we move forward, we're looking at how do we look at equitable recovery? How do we help people access public services and supports? I think there's a lot of information gathering at this stage as well. We understand the scale of the disaster, but there's a lot of information we need to understand the depth of the disaster. And then the last piece is around kind of preserving and building prosperity. And I put it in that frame because, as I mentioned, it's not, we want to help people rebuild, but that's kind of the base level. I think at the end of the day, this is about, building up these communities to be more prosperous than they were before, so that they can be resilient in the face of the next disasters. And that could be creative solutions, such as looking at commercial properties that are going to get sold, and how do we turn those into community spaces and community serving spaces, or community businesses? How do we look at helping renters become owners in this moment, as and if the homeowner is going to sell? So there's really, in these moments, there's not only the what needs to get done, there's the what could be done. And in that frame, I also say, I think these are the moments where there's a lot of public will and political will around supporting folks who have become temporarily, in many cases, unhoused. And how do we look at this as a way to say, these underlying issues facing our community, we should be addressing them in disaster, but also looking at how we build in solutions through policy, through investments, through different community, strategies, that create bigger, broader change for those who are already experiencing disaster, or may experience disaster next. And so really thinking about how we can mobilize around policy actions and solutions, building infrastructure that has sustaining power, and that can really create economic opportunity for communities. And then really I think we have to look at also, and somebody mentioned it previously, how are we strengthening our response system? So we have an amazing, nonprofit sector, but they are working on a shoestring and continuing to be self-sacrificing, but that's not sustainable. How do we ensure that we have a strong community response so that when we're looking into the face of disaster again, which we know will continue to happen, that we can lean on that response system in the moment of need? And then the last thing I'll just say, I think we know we need to be able to be targeted and intentional and to coordinate and collaborate with each other to make sure that this continues. But I think the other thing that's about to happen is that the public is going to move on, but we can't. So the tale of disaster is going to continue, and unless we are really responsive and thoughtful and continuous in this moment, we're just going to feel the ramifications of that. And obviously, the people who will feel it the most are the directly impacted households, but the rest of us will feel it as well, because at the end of the day, we're one knitted together fabric of Los Angeles, and what happens with these communities in the next phase affects all of us. And so we should continue to move things forward, and continue to support each other in the same way that everyone is showing up in this moment. And I think philanthropy in particular can be a big part of that momentum, sustaining effort.
Thanks, Emily. I think everyone's being very efficient with their time, so you do have a couple extra minutes. I wonder if I could ask you what coordination efforts within philanthropy you're already a part of, and what additional coordination do you feel is needed for this next moment where media attention is dying down, but we're still in need of wider coordination across our sector?
Yeah, absolutely. We have been, philanthropy is a beautiful community of friends. And so I think there's been a lot of informal and formal coordination happening to ensure that we're keeping line of sight to each other. At this moment in time, there's no bad place to put money. Everybody's in need. Every organization that is mobilizing is a good place to donate to. Every fund is a good place to donate to. As we move forward into the next phase and the general public kind of turns to the next moment, we're going to need to be, obviously in line and coordinated so we can maximize the resources, because they won't be coming in at the same level as they are now. In kind will start to turn, volunteerism will start to wane. And so I think in those ways, I think we're really excited to work together, with the county as well, which has several funds, to see how we can pair and stitch together philanthropic and public resources, how we can continue to look at where we can be targeted in our approach to, direct dollars that then amplify effort, and really create access to public resources, which are going to always far outstrip whatever philanthropy can support. And then I think the last piece is, as I mentioned, kind of this like rebuilding prosperity phase of the world, I think, is really how do we invest in things that have a lasting opportunity for community. We're very interested in our community prosperity initiative work on how do we support locally the opportunity to create economic engines that support residents and community. And that's the type of intervention that creates lasting opportunity and not just a response. And so I think as we move forward, that will be really key. But philanthropy is already kind of coordinating on giving, and I think there's a lot of opportunity on collective action also around policy, and continuing to work with our public sector leaders to be a voice for Los Angeles, as well as kind of the data, research, information side. At the end of the day, every action is needed at this moment, and action is key. We are going to get to a phase where we have space to gather information so that we can make more, really informed decisions that, really maximize the resources we will have left.
Thank you so much, Emily. United Way has been such a fantastic partner to work with, and we really look forward to staying in partnership with you as we shift into recovery. Next, I would like to turn to Julian Castro, who is the CEO of Latino Community Foundation. Julian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lily. And just want to commend all of the fantastic work that's happened in these last 8 days, all of the progress that's been made, and my fellow leaders in the philanthropic sector. I'm Julian Castro. I'm the CEO of the Latino Community Foundation, which is the nation's largest Latino serving foundation. It's based in the Bay Area with a smaller office in LA. A few years ago, we stood up our California Wildfire Relief Fund for fires that had happened in Northern California, and in the intervening years have used it on a number of natural disasters, including in Southern California, and we reactivated it right after the fire started. So far, we have raised $4 million, and on Tuesday of this week, we announced the first $1 million of grants to 7 different organizations. Our philosophy is that we want to be able to support the most vulnerable residents who are impacted by this fire. As folks know, they're in LA. LA County is about 48% Latina and Latino. And in the neighborhoods that were directly impacted, particularly in the Altadena area, there are many Latinos. In fact, last week, an analysis by the UCLA Latino Politics and Policy Institute estimated that about 74,000 Latinos and Latinas were at risk of displacement or already displaced by the fire. These are also homeowners, they're renters, they're the housekeepers that work in many of these homes in the Pacific Palisades. They're the open air workers, the gardeners, they're street vendors. They're folks of all different walks of life. And I think it's fair to say that for many people, they're living paycheck to paycheck all the time. And this event has turned their life upside down and cut off their livelihood. The 7 organizations that we invested in, we did because they're trusted grassroots organizations that are able to quickly and effectively deliver resources to the community. And give you an example, one of them is Inclusive Action, which is established a fund for open air workers to be able to provide cash assistance. Another one of those is Cielo, that among other things is providing assistance and then also indigenous language interpretation services for people from the indigenous community to be able to access emergency services. So across the board, day laborers, other workers, we want to make sure that we're doing our part to get resources into the hands of nonprofits that are doing the work in community. I had the opportunity earlier this week to visit with 3 of those organizations, including a couple of ones that I mentioned, and was so impressed with the spirit of community, of people donating goods, of the organizing that's happened in such a short time. It also was a very poignant reminder to me, as others have mentioned, that this relief, recovery, and rebuild really goes in phases. And so as y'all saw, I'm sure folks have been out and had the opportunity to see, right? You see like piles of clothes, you see a lot of bottled water, you see foodstuffs, you see diapers and baby wipes and other things that are being packaged and organized and put into car trunks. That immediate relief, right? We've been focused on that so far, along with cash assistance, rental assistance. Now we're moving into an intermediate phase, right, of rental assistance and cash assistance. There are things that continue, like the need for interpretation services, but also issues like worker safety. Some folks may have read the Los Angeles Times article about how hazardous some of the work around picking up ash is and will continue to be, and the need for worker training and similar investments. And then in the long term, everything that comes with thinking through how to ensure that people are able to recover and be as resilient as possible. That still includes rental assistance and other forms of assistance, but it also is thinking bigger in policy terms. One of the things I like about being part of a community foundation is that we have the ability to invest in organizations that are advocating, and then also to dedicate some amount of time to advocacy ourselves. I think that one of the best things that we can do is really to focus on how LA can come back better and stronger. And that means tying these lessons learned to the housing element and investments that are made in housing. It means figuring out how to better use the institutions, everything from the transit authority to the health department, to be able to better deliver health and transit and better outcomes or quality of life for people. It also means ensuring that there is worker safety, not only in the cleanup and recovery process, but across the board, right? So that we have policy changes ultimately that lead to an equitable recovery. And also in the process that we learn better, even within this philanthropic sector, how to respond. I had the opportunity at the end of the Obama administration to be at HUD, and I remember visiting New Orleans on the 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. Must have been very late August of 2015. And I'll never forget going into the lower Ninth Ward and visiting with people and hearing stories, talking to families. And that same year, also visiting New Jersey, where 3 years earlier, Hurricane Sandy had happened. One of the things I think we all know is that this kind of recovery takes years. It's often very frustrating. It never happens as quickly as people want. And so there's a resilience and a persistence and a stridence that has to be part of our approach. I also have seen that philanthropy can be very nimble sometimes where the government can't. And for a community like the Latino community, where you have a lot of immigrants, some of them documented, some of them undocumented, mixed status families that are impacted, trust is so important. And oftentimes, especially right now with the conversation around mass deportations and what's going to happen with the change in administration on Monday, that trust isn't always in the government. And so how do we devise ways to ensure that trust that's been built up by grassroots organizations is utilized fully and invested in now and going forward? And then finally, I would just say that, this is the first time, my first experience on this side of things. I spent time as a mayor of San Antonio and then at HUD. It's the first time on the philanthropic side. And I believe in the power of philanthropy to marshal resources, especially in moments like this, and in the leadership role of philanthropy. And I want to thank everybody, who has stepped up because I've seen the difference that it makes out in community.
Thank you so much for being here and for all your service to the sector. I am just really curious with just a couple extra minutes here. You mentioned your public service on that national scale, and I'm hoping to get your perspective on, all these past disasters that you've mentioned and learning from them, knowing all that could go wrong. What is one thing that you hope we get right for the recovery of Los Angeles and our region?
Of course, meeting immediate needs, but to keep the spirit of people feeling like everybody is in this together. I felt that spirit deeply in Los Angeles when I was there a couple of days ago, and to turn that into policies that lead to an equitable recovery. I think we had that moment at a national level in COVID, and in some ways, in some of the investments that we made, that was followed through on. I think Los Angeles has an opportunity to recover and rebuild even stronger, and importantly, more equitably, if you capture that spirit going forward.
Thank you so much for being here. I would like to, at this point, invite everyone to join me in thanking all of our speakers today for your time, your commitment to community, and your bold leadership through this moment of uncertainty. We will be taking questions from the audience. I see a lot of them have been coming in throughout our session, and I'd love to call on my colleague Katie to come off mic or on mic, off mute, to help surface any questions that might have come up.
Yes, thank you. And echoing my thanks to our speakers, this has been incredibly informative, and we have dozens and dozens of questions as expected from folks who are very curious and want to learn more. And we'll be honest up front, I don't know if we'll be able to answer all of these questions, but we will certainly be tracking them. And if the folks who are on this call today can't answer them, we will work to get them answered. One question from the top, and we've gotten some notes on how great this space has been. Lily, is SoCal Grantmakers planning to do any other briefings like this? We see housing, for example, coming up again and again as a question that folks want to learn more about. What is the plan for continued coordination and bringing information and resources to the philanthropic sector?
Thanks for the question. We hope that this is a preliminary funder briefing, and we hope to do this again in a series. If you have recommendations on themes that you would like to hear about and learn about, please be in touch with us. My contact information will be shared in the post-webinar materials. There are so many ways to approach recovery. It is very complex. And so we hope to focus future webinars on things like housing, on immigration, undocumented individuals, healthcare. There's been a really tremendous impact and response from the educational sector. So perhaps we do a funder briefing on that. But also, like I mentioned at the top of this webinar, we've been here before. So what lessons can we learn from past disasters, which can be passed on at this moment of intervention before things go too haywire, so we can organize the philanthropic community. So short answer is we're going to do this again. Please be in partnership with us to figure out what the needs are. We would love to be of service.
Great. We have a question submitted on the Q&A. The toll on people's mental health will be something we all have to take seriously as these big questions keep arising. Curious for the kind of funders on this call, in what ways have you been thinking about mental health as a part of this response, whether it's kind of within your own organization or supporting your partners and your grantees to kind of navigate this long kind of road to recovery, and those questions, and would welcome anybody who has thoughts on that to just chime in.
But I'll chime in that that is something that we're thinking about actively, and particularly as we get onto these next phases. Part of our grant making was to UltiMed. UltiMed, of course, there has a number of clinics that serve many folks in Los Angeles. UltiMed, and we want to find others also that address the mental health and physical health and wellness of the community going forward. And again, are places that people feel comfortable seeking help. The other thing that we've invested in the past and will do this time likely is in promotoras, basically, core of people, often women, who will go and facilitate the ability of residents to access health services, including mental health.
I think this is a space we'll continue to think through and learn, like, what comes next. To the great points already made, I think there's, the folks who've been impacted, and then there's this kind of the helpers who are also impacted in a different way. And then there's this, larger group of people. I think all of those who live in Los Angeles over the last week, the collective anxiety in the air and in community was significant. And so I know that we'll be continuing to feel that for a while. So having spaces for healing, having opportunities to just be in community together, and having the the ability to rebuild joyful moments together will be key. And that might look differently as we continue to move forward in various ways. I'll also say I think it's been really heartening to see the immense response by people. I think in moments of fear, there are a lot of folks who moved to action, and it's really just powerful to see. And I hope folks will continue to stay part of the recovery in that way, because being part of that change, I think, is also healing in a different way.
We're hearing on the ground that some groups are being formed, almost like to form support groups for those who have lost their homes, because it's hard to relate if you haven't. And yeah, there's a lot of resources out there for people kind of in the immediate term, offering up free counseling. Foothill Family Services, I know, is doing some of that, and some others. So I think, I think one of the challenges is what's the longer term response.
I'm also seeing in the chat here from Kate Anderson, one of our partners at the Center for Strategic Partnerships at the county, that LA County's Department of Mental Health has moved into action and is mobilized as well. Thanks, Kate.
And Pasadena is unique. It's one of, I think, 3 cities in California that has its own public health department. So we'll be reaching out and coordinating with them about next steps on that front.
We have a couple questions related to kind of housing, and some notes here that some of the housing that was lost was rent controlled. And Emily, you talked a lot about kind of the already existing housing crisis in Los Angeles, and just curious if there are any other reflections on there was a note on kind of thinking through how we can protect communities from property speculation, and there was an idea thrown out of a land trust. And I mean, I'm sure there will be a lot of really, really innovative ideas and attention put on to making sure that folks can rebuild and can return. And so curious, maybe Emily first, if there are any other kind of reflections on housing and what might be needed at this moment, and kind of particularly what can philanthropy be doing right now to help resource any research or kind of policy or kind of that kind of focus on housing.
Yeah, absolutely. Housing, obviously not only unique to Los Angeles, but the housing affordability crisis persists and is really pervasive. And so we need to find solutions. And these are moments in time that really mark that. And so we need to find solutions for the fire victims, and then also obviously continue the conversation on affordable housing more globally. In this moment, there are state and local, movement to protect as some of the fire victims in terms of moratoriums, price gouging, tracking, and combatants, being able to look, to protect folks from being dropped or having non-renewal for insurance. So the governor and local leaders have really started to move on legislative action. We also know, though, that we're going to continue to need to push as a community, and therefore support our local organizers and advocates to be able to continue to ensure that government protections are in place. They are reaching all of the groups that need it, and that we're also recognizing that protections don't protect everyone, and that we need to, be able to pick up where government leaves off to support, groups that are not going to necessarily be covered, or who just don't realize that they're being protected and, potentially are pushed out by unfortunately, shameful actions by landlords in moments like this. We really need to be thinking about the variety of actions that it's going to take. Many communities impacted by fires have at least put in protections for things like first right of refusal, so that folks can return. But also we need to be thinking not only about making sure people can come back, but as and if people choose not to, what happens to that property? Can we have it be, first go to a community benefit, a community use, for government nonprofits who, can bring value to the community, and offer recovery, relief, and long-term economic opportunity. And so for all of those reasons, I think both legislative action, policy action, and just the community supports to fill in the gaps are going to be essential. And then I think the other thing is, to your data and research point, we don't know what we don't know. There's a lot of expectation in terms of the ramifications of this on affordability. We've lost housing stock. The law of supply and demand is real. And just in these moments, also people take advantage of people's desperation and increase rents and really push unfortunate practices. And so we need to keep a mind and an eye on all of those things. And that's going to take coordination, conversation, and research. I was just on a call this morning with someone to start to map things out. Who's an owner? Who's a renter? What is the possibility of the effects of this fire on their decisions to sell or return? So just starting to try to ask the key questions that could get us to those actions. But I just will underscore, beyond the direct assistance and supports, policy action is going to be key, not only now, but in the ongoing recovery.
Wondering, Jennifer, if you have any thoughts kind of in the Altadena area on any of the kind of points Emily made, or how to make sure that folks are able to return and rebuild. And to Emily's point, if they're not, what then happens, I guess, to those properties?
Yeah, I'm going to a meeting later today. Group of folks are sort of coming together. The idea of a land trust has been floated in Altadena, so that's one thing I mentioned earlier. Some just creative solutions for temporary affordable housing, renting RVs. We've been approached with the idea of, can some of these homeowners buy can there be funding to buy a tiny house, which, they're like 30 grand on Amazon or something, and put them on their property while they rebuild. That then becomes an ADU, which maybe improves the affordable housing stock over time. So lots of ideas floating our way, and yeah, but I think the reality, I heard some statistics yesterday, and I apologize because I don't remember the numbers, but there were statistics around the impact on the housing stock of apartments and renters in our community. And yeah, I think there are just lots of ideas being floated, and we need creative solutions. I think the final thing that I will say is one of the things that we've been talking about is, how do we, Emily talked about so many advocacy issues that are so important. How do we build some kind of infrastructure on the ground and staff that because right now it's a lot of volunteers, architects with day jobs who want to design homes for free, and all kinds of things coming together. But ultimately there needs to be kind of a staffed entity to absorb the data, create a legislative agenda that we want to fight for, bring the right people together in different ways. And so that's, long-term locally, and Altadena people, I can tell you, they want it to be local, and locally driven. So that's what we're hearing.
We've got a question here around how folks are thinking about supporting small service businesses like gardeners, housekeepers, folks that may have have been dependent on the communities impacted, even if they don't physically live there. Julian, maybe this one is for you and for the work that LCF is doing. And I will say on this kind of question that we got, a number of folks have dropped resources, which is really incredible. So would recommend folks look at those. But Julian, I would love to kind of get your thoughts on the work that LCF is doing.
Sure. Yeah, this is a large part of our focus. Folks, a lot of small contractors who are Latina or Latino. I know in every community and certainly in the Latino community, one of the groups that we're funding, for instance, is TMC Community Capital that normally does low interest loans to businesses, to small entrepreneurs to help them get started, and now has turned that process, their system, into a grants system for the purpose of helping people to be able to make it through these next weeks and months, and also to build a relationship with them, hopefully to be able to assist them further in the years to come. On top of that, a couple of the other groups that we funded also have strong relationships with small contractors, small business owners, as you mentioned, for instance, gardeners, street vendors, others in the community that their livelihoods, even if they didn't live in that community, their livelihood really right now has been tremendously impacted.
Thank you. Jennifer, Emily, any kind of additional thoughts on supporting folks who worked in these impacted communities but don't live there? Additionally, we've got some questions around any efforts to support seniors, particularly, or those with disabilities that have been impacted.
On the senior front, I think I mentioned in my remarks that the YWCA of San Gabriel Valley has 300 senior clients in Altadena, had 300 senior clients in Altadena. They're trying to track them down wherever they are. Many have lost their homes, and they're trying to connect them with services. You know, one example is they were able to connect with a senior who evacuated to Claremont and now has gotten them connected with services in the city of Claremont. So that's one organization that's definitely dealing with directly impacted seniors. And case management is needed because they need lots of services, not just the ones that the Y was providing, the food service and so forth, but lots of services, navigating, insurance, all of that. A lot of these people even have tech challenges. You know, they're not good at navigating things online. So, and then there are some other organizations locally. If somebody's particularly interested in seniors, we have a senior grants program, so we're diverting all of that money to senior relief, and happy to share that list with any funders particularly interested in that list. You can reach out to me. And then in terms of those with disabilities, we have two really fabulous Pasadena headquartered organizations that have regional footprint, Ability First and Villa Esperanza. Both serve multiple, you know, both very local folks and have, you know, but have capacity. And so those are two great organizations on the ground with those with serving those with disability. So again, happy to share with funders who specifically want that information.
Great. Yeah, we've been getting a lot of kind of comments of, will these resources be available, all of these links in the Q&A? And yes, we will collect all of these and can share them out as a resource. We did get a couple of questions on how the county has been kind of coordinating and collaborating with folks on this call and not on this call. And I think we have Kate Anderson still on this call. Kate, would you like to come? We can give you speaking power. Just put in the chat if you would like that. If there was kind of anything you'd like to share about the work that the county is doing to partner with philanthropy and coordinate and collaborate, would you like to speak?
Oh my gosh, I would love to. I am so grateful to Southern California Grantmakers, to Philanthropy California, to Lily, to Julian, to Emily, Miguel and Abstentia, Jennifer, and all of our friends in philanthropy. The county is quite clear that we cannot respond to this disaster on our own, and we are so grateful to be partnering with philanthropy. I also want to say the city of Los Angeles as well. We have been connecting and working hand in glove with the city in all of these responses. You've seen in the chat, the county it's an all hands on deck moment. So our Department of Mental Health is standing up and moving out and helping to respond to this mental health crisis. Our Department of Aging and Disabilities is also quite clear about how difficult this is for so many and for our seniors. So they are stepping into action as well. And we have been helping philanthropy come together. There are a couple of major funds that we have been bringing together to talk about some of those initial coordination efforts. Emily, as you were speaking, I was taking prolific notes around, yes, in terms of this relief, there's so much that just needs to happen so quickly. And then we really need to move into coordination. So we brought a small group together just yesterday to begin brainstorming on what some of that coordination could look like. Could we come up with a single app? Could we have a dashboard that would have a heat map that would allow us to make sure that we really are getting those county, city, and philanthropic resources out where they are most needed? The county is also, again, in really close partnership with the city of LA. And as many of you know, Altadena is unincorporated LA County. So it's Supervisor Barger working very closely then with that community to stand up a worker relief and business interruption fund to make sure that we are getting funds out to workers. Julian, I heard you describing so many that are impacted, and not impacted because of losing their homes, but impacted by losing their livelihoods. So can we then together stand up a worker relief and business interruption fund that would help make sure that we're getting resources out to folks as quickly as possible? And I've seen some things in the chat around, can we learn from Maui and can we learn from what happened up in Paradise? And we are very much following those models. I want to call out my friend and colleague who many of you know, Chris Coe, who was the first to bring up this idea of, could we have a common portal? So it'll look different because we are the county of LA and we're 10 million people compared to a tenth of the size, and we can still learn from those best practices and come together. And I'm grateful that we have that collaborative spirit and that we will keep this going. And I love the idea that we will rebuild back better. I'm grateful to be able to be a part of it.
Wonderful, thank you. We've got time for one more question, and maybe this is just kind of a final question to our three folks who are still speakers still here. What is kind of the one takeaway for funders on this call that they can do in this moment to support your work, to support communities on the ground working to respond and recover? Maybe we'll start with Emily and then Jennifer and then Julian.
Sure. It's hard to, boil it down to one thing. But I guess I would say that we should stay the course. When the public moves on, we can't continue to be part of the recovery and response effort so that we can, help folks return, rebuild, but also kind of build towards this more prosperous future. And that would be a major, piece I would want to leave with everyone today.
I would echo that. We've all talked about the long-term nature of this. And I would also just express appreciation that funders that we have been dealing with have been not required an application, really just a conversation typically. Please be patient with us on reporting, and yeah, stay the course. And I also appreciate what Julian said about just our ability to keep the morale high and that feeling of we're in this together. I really appreciate your comments because I think we all need to find a way. And you know what? To be honest, money coming in and keeps coming in is, I was at a meeting last night where I was announcing some grants, and it makes people feel like people care. So it does sustain the hope.
I think very well said. And I mean, I would just echo that to be nimble and lean in the moment, and then also to think about it in terms of these phases and what the community is going to need going forward, and to let the community lead with their aspirations, right, as they recover and they rebuild. And I think, you know, we see ourselves as in service of that.
Thank you all. And we had an overwhelming number of questions, so we'll work to answer the ones we can and pass off ones that were directed to the state or to the county, to our partners there. And I'll pass it back to Lily to help close us out. And thank you again for our speakers and for folks for asking such thoughtful questions.
Thank you so much, Katie, for helping to moderate the Q&A. I'd also like to yield a little bit of time to Millie Yamaki from our Corporate Advisory Committee to come on camera and to just share maybe a very brief summary of our corporate response. I know we've represented the voices of many of our foundations in our network, but there has been a tremendous response from the private sector as well. So Millie, could you give us just a sense of what our advisory committee is hearing and what perhaps you're doing to mobilize resources? Millie, I see you're
Thank
off.
you so much. Oops, I think my camera was disabled, but no, thank you so much for having me on behalf of the Corporate Advisory Council. I'm actually prepared to speak on behalf of what Bank of America has done, but if any of our corporate partners are also on the line, feel free to chime in and share what you're doing if time permits. But thank you again for giving me this space in the forum to share what we've been doing. Bank of America has been proudly serving the Los Angeles region for over 100 years. So we have very deep ties with our employees, clients, and nonprofit partners, as well as community members. And our main focus has been to support those who have been directly impacted by the fires. We've taken a number of actions to respond to the disaster. In terms of philanthropy, last week we committed $1 million to the American Red Cross for immediate relief for families who had to evacuate and impacted by the fires. We've also contributed an additional $500,000 to the LA Regional Food Bank and $500,000 to the LA Chamber of Commerce to support small businesses in a relief fund. So to date, we've contributed $2 million for the relief efforts to date. In terms of what we're doing business-wise, we've reached out to more than over 2.5 million Los Angeles area clients to make them aware of our client assistance program, which provides financial assistance to those impacted by the fires, which include mortgage forbearance, refunds on fees, and other payment assistance for businesses and consumer clients. We also have a hotline for clients facing hardships that they can call us at. I can share that phone number after this call, but it's 855-729-1764. Clients can also access Erica on their mobile app. And we continue to contact our client to ensure that they're receiving business continuity and assistance that they need. And I'll turn it back to you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Millie. I will turn towards our closing at this point, but thank you so much again to all of our panelists today to taking the time out of your schedules to be with us in this moment. I want to note that Los Angeles is known for its nickname, the City of Angels, hearkening to the meaning of its name in Spanish, Los Angeles. Last week, the poet Amanda Gorman released a poem called Smoldering Dawn, which I highly encourage you to look for and listen to in its entirety during your next moment of pause. In the beginning of her poem, she writes, "All of our angels have gone in the smoldering dawn," referring to the wildfires and the smoke that it left in our skies. But she reminds us that all hope is not lost, not in the disaster and not even in the after. She ends her poem with, We reclaim our city's name, a revelation that only this place tells. To find our angels, all we need do is look within ourselves. Thank you so much for the philanthropic community support and appealing to the better angels of our nature. And thank you to the Philanthropy California team for your collective leadership, for lending your hands, minds, and your hearts to our shared mission and values. I'd like to pass it to my colleague Tuli to close us out and tell you how to follow up on all the resources that we've shared today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much again for joining us. I know it's been a rough couple of weeks, and we really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today. After you're exiting the webinar, there will be a brief survey that will pop up asking about the Foundation's response efforts. If any that you're doing, please take 2 minutes to complete the survey. The information will be invaluable to us as we work to identify gaps and coordinate broader philanthropic response. We will continue to host additional wildfire briefings in the coming weeks, so please keep an eye out on SCG's e-newsletters. The resource page will be continued to be updated. We will also be following up with the recording of this webinar and a summary of resources shared in the chat. We hope that this course can be an avenue through which you are able to learn, connect, access resources. And if you would like to share your work on a future call or amplify specific issues, please reach out to us. You can also reach out directly to Lily at SoCalGrantmakers.org, or myself, Tuli at SoCalGrantmakers.org. We'll make sure to move that information forward. Thank you again. Have a great day and take good care of yourselves.
Thank you, everyone.